Here I am in Atlanta at Centennial Park where the Olympics were held. I just gave a speech for the American Foundry Society and about to head to the airport. I had a little bit of a respite to walk around. And what struck me in talking to participants after the talk is how much confusion there is about looking at trends and understanding what are the trends that could potentially affect your industry. And I always use, when I prepare for a speech, a framework of 9 different trends, and I'm just going to outline them here. I think it's important to get trends right because if you avoid looking in the unusual places, you can get blindsided because sometimes a trend doesn't seem relevant, and then you discover later that wow, it is significantly going to impact my industry. And if you get that wrong, you could really be blindsided. So when I'm preparing a speech, I always go to look at industry reports and YouTube videos and conference recordings, and I look for 9 things. I think of it first, there's an outer circle, and there are 4 macro forces. You've got socio-demographic changes that could change your workforce or change your customer behavior. You've got macroeconomic things that could be, say, the growth in China and the growth in India and GDP rates and interest rates. And then you've got technology, of course. Most people look at technology when a lot of disruptive companies and disruption experts, when they talk about disruption, they only look at one of these 9, which is technology. So certainly you should look at technology. You also have regulation, and here you want to think about, hey, not just being a taker of the regulation that's coming, but a shaper of it. And it's a great exercise to look at regulation and say, look, if the worst thing happens, there are going to be companies that win and companies that lose. And stepping out into this future where there is the worst case scenario in regulation, what would be the design of a company or a business model that is suited for that? So you got these 4 macro things. And then those 4 then operate on the Porter's 5 forces. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Many of you are, but just to briefly summarize here, you want to look at changes in your suppliers and what their bargaining power will be. In the case of foundries are companies that basically take metal, cast them into parts that are used in automobiles and in construction and airplanes. They want to look at mining and they want to look at labor input. So what are the disruptions, the changes going on in mining in the case of foundries? Then you want to look at the buyers and what are the changes affecting buyer behavior, buyer needs, the way they like to use things. In the case of foundries, it's primarily automotive, trucking, construction, oil and gas, those kinds of things. And there are lots of interesting things happening there in not only what kind of metals they demand more aluminum, less steel, the regulations impacting them, but also when they want stuff more quickly, they want more on-demand supply. Then you've got to look at your direct competitors, the rivalry among direct competitors, which most companies do look at. You should certainly look at that. You want to look at new entrants, so potential entrants or exits. In the case of foundries, there's a lot of consolidation, so there are actually going to be fewer competitors in the future. So there's kind of like a negative new entrant factor, if you will. And then the last one, the 9th one that I'm listing here, I think is maybe the most important. And Michael Porter calls them substitutes. What we like to call them today is disruptors. So technology disruptors, like the Silicon Valley people that are doing something that make it not needed to use our product or service. You know, like taxi cab companies, maybe they didn't originally see Uber as a competitor because they weren't a taxi cab company. They were a technology company. And, you know, we kind of think like of those as like a new dynamic, but Porter has been talking about that for 20 years. You want to look at substitutes. And in the case of foundries, that would be what is attacking you that would not require a customer to need a foundry. For example, electric vehicles are made with electric motors, which require less casting because you don't require an engine and therefore an engine block. And so you don't think of that as a competitor necessarily, but if you make sure that you check through all 9 of these, you won't run the risk of overlooking those substitutes and being blindsided by them. So when you think about the future, think about 9 things, and we'll read them really quickly here. Think about socio-demographics, think about macroeconomics, think about technology, think about regulation. And then look in and think about your suppliers, think about your buyers, think about your direct competitors, think about new entrants, and think about substitutes or disruptors.